There are stories that should not be told, not because they are not true, but because their truth transcends the limits of understanding, touching a forbidden zone where logic bows and primal fear reigns. Our story begins with a whisper from the dead, a faint radio signal that pierces the silence of the Straits of Malacca on a sultry June day in 1947. Imagine you are a radio operator on a merchant ship, cruising on a glassy sea. All around is an endless blue, an almost artificial peace. Suddenly, in your headset, a broken string of Morse code rings out, a trembling hand desperately trying to cling to life. SOS. SOS. From the Ourang Medan. We are drifting. All the officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Perhaps the entire crew is dead. There is a dead silence for a few seconds, broken only by the static. Then, another series of jumbled codes, and finally, two final words, sent with the last of a dying man's strength: I die. And then, silence. Only the sound of the sea remained, indifferent and eternal. The terrifying SOS signal was picked up by several ships in the area. The nearest ship, the Silver Star, an American merchant ship, immediately changed course, racing full speed toward the coordinates. 2 hours later, the silhouette of a ship appeared on the horizon. It was the SS Ourang Medan, a Dutch freighter drifting without a sign of life. There was no smoke from the funnel, not a soul on board. The ship was like a giant steel coffin, eerily silent under the harsh tropical sun. The captain of the Silver Star tried to communicate by whistle, by radio, but all he got in return was absolute silence. A sense of unease crept into the minds of the most experienced sailors. Something was terribly wrong. A landing party was formed. They carefully approached the ghost ship. When they set foot on the deck of the Ourang Medan, the first thing they felt was not the heat of the sun-baked metal, but a chill that was chilling, a chill that radiated from the ship itself, as if it had just passed through the icy depths of hell. And then they saw them. The first sight was on the bridge. The captain lay on his back, eyes wide open, staring up at the lifeless sky, mouth agape, as if in a silent scream. The other officers were in the same position, lying everywhere, all of their faces frozen in an expression of utter horror. Not pain, not surprise, but pure terror, as if they had witnessed something the human mind could not bear. Fingers curled, raised in the air, as if trying to fight off an invisible enemy. Down below, the horrors were repeated. The entire crew, from cooks to mechanics to ordinary sailors, were dead. Each one was different, but all had the same expression: eyes wide open, mouths agape, faces twisted in fear. Even the ship's dog, a German shepherd, was found dead, baring his teeth in a perpetual snarl at some unseen threat. The strangest thing? There was not a single wound on their bodies, not a drop of blood, no sign of a struggle or violence. They had simply died of fear. The radio operator was found slumped over the telegraph, fingers still on the keyboard, the one who had sent the last message. His face was also a mask of horror. The captain of the Silver Star, a man who had been at sea all his life, felt a strong urge to leave immediately. This ship was cursed. He decided to tow the Ourang Medan to the nearest port to investigate. But as the tow line was tightened, a faint smoke began to rise from Hold 4. The landing party hurried back to their ship. Within minutes, a loud explosion shattered the silence. The Ourang Medan shook, flames erupted, and then it began to sink. With unnatural speed, the steel coffin slid beneath the waves, taking the bodies and their secrets with it to the bottom of the ocean, lost forever. The ship self-destructed, as if to erase evidence of the nightmare that had unfolded on its decks. But it left behind a question, one that would haunt investigators, historians, and curious minds for decades to come. What drove a seasoned crew to die in such utter terror on a calm sea, under the sun? And why did the ship destroy itself so violently? The answers, if any, lie not on the surface of the sea, but buried in secret documents, forgotten records, and the darkness of a war that had just ended. A ship disappearing is not uncommon on the ocean, but a ship that obliterates itself after sending out a distress call is another story. The explosion and the rapidity with which the Ourang Medan sank dashed any hope of a field investigation. All that remains are the accounts of the Silver Star's crew and a name, Ourang Medan, the man from Medan, a Dutch name for a ship, but as investigators began to comb through the records, they hit their first wall of silence. There was no official record of a ship named the SS Ourang Medan in the Lloyd's Register or any other major shipping authority at the time. It was a literal ghost ship, not just in death, but in existence. Where did it come from? Who did it belong to? And more importantly, what was it carrying and hold for where the explosion occurred? The silence from the authorities fueled speculation. Amid the ashes of World War II, the world was in the throes of a chaotic rebuilding. Sea lanes were still rife with unnamed dangers, not just mines, but clandestinely smuggled military secrets. The first and most mundane theory was that the Ourang Medan was carrying an illicit cargo. It could have been weapons, gold, or was something much more sensitive. The explosion could have been a malfunction with the cargo, or a deliberate act of sabotage to cover up the evidence. But this theory failed to explain the core. Why did the entire crew die with such horrified expressions? A chemical leak would have caused suffocation, convulsions, burns, not silent, frozen fear. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. A handful of independent researchers, dissatisfied with the official silence, have dug into the rumors and fragments of information. They have found a tenuous link, a glimmer of a project the world would rather forget. Unit 731. For those who don't know, Unit 731 was a secret biological and chemical weapons research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. The experiments they performed on humans were beyond the definition of cruelty. They created deadly diseases, nerve gases capable of killing silently. After Japan's surrender, many of Unit 731's key scientists were secretly granted immunity from prosecution by the United States government in exchange for their research data. A dark deal, an ethical trade-off for an advantage in the coming Cold War. The theory goes, what if the Ourang Medan wasn't a regular cargo ship, but a floating laboratory or a ship carrying the deadly legacy of Unit 731? Perhaps the ship, under a false name, was on its way to deliver a shipment of biological or chemical weapons to some power. A shipment of things like sarin, tabun, or perhaps something even more horrifying, a nerve agent designed to induce terrifying hallucinations before killing its victims. Picture this scenario. A small tank leaks in the cargo hold. A colorless, odorless gas slowly spreads throughout the ship. It does not cause asphyxiation or immediate physical pain. Instead, it attacks the central nervous system, the part of the brain responsible for fear. It amplifies the deepest terrors in each person's subconscious, turning them into vivid, lifelike visions. The crew does not see a physical enemy. They see their own personal hell. Some see unimaginable monsters. Others see their loved ones being tortured. Or perhaps they simply face an emptiness, an existential horror beyond words. Death came slowly, not from poison, but from their own brains shutting down from the overload. Their hearts stopped beating from fear. That was why their eyes were wide open, their mouths gaping in a wordless scream. They had died from witnessing the unimaginable. The radio operator, in his last conscious moments, tried to send out a warning, but his hallucinated brain could only describe the chaos and death that surrounded him. And the explosion? Maybe it was a safety mechanism. If the cargo was compromised, it would self-destruct to prevent a global pandemic. Or maybe the chemical, when exposed to salt water or air, would become extremely explosive. Either way, the ship and its secrets were buried. This theory, though creepy, fits all the details unsettlingly. The woundless death, the horrified expressions, the sudden disappearance of the ship. It turns the Ourang Medan from a maritime ghost story into a hidden chapter in the history of war, a reminder that the most terrifying demons come not from the deep, but from man himself. The Unit 731 theory, with all the horror and allure of a hidden conspiracy, seems like the perfect explanation. It is tinged with the tragedy of war, human cruelty, and government cover-ups. It turns the Ourang Medan into a symbol of unpunished crimes. But history, like the ocean, is rarely smooth. It has undercurrents, unexpected waves, and sometimes the answers lie not in grand conspiracies, but in overlooked technical details. Let's put aside the stories of bioweapons and evil scientists. Look at the Ourang Medan not as a coffin filled with military secrets, but as an old ship, a steel machine with boilers, engines, and a complex system of pipes. And in the world of machines, silence is often a sign of a fatal malfunction. Another group of investigators, more realistic, has proposed another scenario, one no less terrifying, but one rooted in technological failure rather than human malevolence. Their theory revolves around a silent killer, something every sailor is wary of: carbon monoxide, CO. Imagine the boiler system of the Ourang Medan malfunctions. A small crack, a leak in a pipe, and CO, a byproduct of incomplete combustion, begins to leak. It is colorless, odorless, and tasteless. It slowly fills the engine compartments, seeps through the doors, enters the ventilation system, and spreads throughout the ship. The crew would not notice immediately. The initial symptoms were vague: headaches, dizziness, nausea. They might have thought it was seasickness or the tropical heat. But as the CO levels rose, it began to displace oxygen from the blood, slowly starving the brain and internal organs. Confusion, impaired judgment, mild hallucinations. The entire crew, from the bridge to the engine room, were slowly slipping into an eternal sleep without even realizing it. Death came gently, almost peacefully, but this contradicts the expression of horror. A peaceful death by CO asphyxiation cannot produce faces frozen in fear. And this is where the theory adds another element, a detail that is often mentioned in different versions of the story: the cargo that the Ourang Medan was carrying. According to some unofficial sources, the ship's cargo holds contained large quantities of potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. Now, let's put the pieces together. Not only is the boiler leaking CO, it's also creating a smoldering fire. The fire is damaging the hull structure, allowing seawater to flood into the cargo hold. And when the seawater comes into contact with potassium cyanide, a deadly chemical reaction occurs, releasing a cloud of highly toxic hydrogen cyanide gas. The gas attacks the nervous system violently, causing convulsions, paralysis, and death within minutes. So the scenario now becomes more complex and terrifying. The crew is slowly being weakened by CO, their minds are hazy, their bodies are sluggish. Suddenly, a second wave of the poison hits, stronger and faster. Perhaps it is at this moment, as their bodies convulse in their final moments, as their nervous systems are destroyed, their faces are distorted into the masks of pain and horror that the Silver Star sailors saw. That silent scream is not a scream of spiritual fear, but the final physical reaction of a body being destroyed from within by chemicals. And the nitroglycerin? That was the explanation for the explosion. The smoldering fire from the boilers had finally reached the unstable cargo. Boom! An explosion powerful enough to rip the ship apart and send it plunging to the bottom of the ocean, erasing all evidence of a catastrophic industrial accident. This theory is scientifically sound. It explains the mass deaths, the lack of violence, and the ship's destruction. It makes the Ourang Medan a warning about the dangers of transporting toxic cargo on old ships. A sad story, but understandable. But it leaves out one crucial detail, one that has haunted everyone who has heard the story since the beginning. That expression. The accounts of the witnesses aboard the Silver Star don't just describe pain. They describe terror. They describe twisted arms pointing to something in the sky, as if trying to fend off an invisible attacker from above. Poison gas can kill you, but can it make an entire crew look in the same direction and point to a common horror? The chemical theory, while plausible, feels too clean, too neat. It lacks the element of absurdity, the insanity that has turned this story into a legend. Perhaps the answer lies neither in chemical reactions nor in human conspiracies. Perhaps it lies somewhere in between, or in another dimension altogether. When logic and science retreat, when human conspiracies seem too complex, the imagination begins to wander into forbidden territories. It seeks explanations not in books, but in the echoes of the universe, in frequencies that the human ear cannot hear, but the body can feel. And here we enter one of the strangest and most terrifying theories about the Ourang Medan: infrasound. Sound is a weapon. We know that. But what about the sounds we can't hear? Infrasound are extremely low-frequency vibrations, below 20 hertz, beyond the range of human hearing. They are created by monumental events: earthquakes under the sea, violent storms thousands of miles away, or even the huge, old engines of a ship. They are the silent scream of nature, an invisible force that can affect matter and, more importantly, the human mind. Imagine another scenario. The Ourang Medan, on its fateful voyage, accidentally entered an acoustic dead zone, a rare and perfect confluence of factors. A small seismic event on the seafloor, combined with a particular weather pattern, created a column of intense infrasound waves, focused directly on the ship's location. Or perhaps its own failing propulsion system created a deadly, resonant frequency. At first, no one noticed anything, just a vague sense of unease, a slight flutter in the chest. The ship's dog, with its heightened senses, might have begun to whine, growl into the void. Then the unease turned to nameless fear. Heart rate increased. Paranoia began to sprout. Sailors looked at each other suspiciously. They heard whispers at the edges of their hearing, saw shadows pass by at the corners of their eyes. That's because infrasound at a certain frequency, around 19 hertz, also known as the phantom frequency, can vibrate human eyeballs, creating visual illusions. It acts directly on the nervous system, triggering a fight or flight response without any tangible threat. The fear the crew felt wasn't coming from a monster or an enemy. It was coming from the air they were breathing, from the vibrations that coursed through their bodies. The intensity of the infrasound increased. The psychological fear now turned into a physical attack. The intense vibrations could cause shortness of breath, severe dizziness, and even internal organ damage. In their final moments, the crew was no longer fighting an imaginary enemy. They were being tortured to death by their own environment. They looked up at the sky not because they saw something, but perhaps out of reflex, a desperate attempt to escape the invisible pressure that was crushing them. The silent screams on their faces were a mark of extreme pain and terror, as their bodies were shaken to the point of being torn apart from within. Death came quickly, simultaneously, without leaving any visible injuries. And the explosion? A powerful enough infrasonic wave could have caused enough vibrations to detonate a volatile cargo like nitroglycerin. The same energy that killed the crew signed the ship's death warrant, ensuring that the secret of that deadly frequency would remain forever buried at the bottom of the ocean. This theory, with its blend of real science and creepy mystery, seems to encompass every aspect of the story. It is both natural and supernatural. It turns the ocean from a backdrop to the main villain, a near-perfect explanation. But the story of the Ourang Medan has one final twist, one that is even more shocking than theories about secret weapons or demonic frequencies. A twist that asks not what happened to the ship, but a much simpler and more disturbing question. Did the Ourang Medan really exist? In the dusty drawers of history, there are ghosts created not by tragedy, but by the human pen. And the ghost of the Ourang Medan may be the most terrifying of them all. Over the course of our journey, we have sailed through seas of possibility, from dark military conspiracies to catastrophic chemical accidents to bizarre physical theories. Each theory is an island, a temporary refuge for our logic from the storm of absurdity. But all of these islands are built on a single foundation, that the SS Ourang Medan really did exist. Now we face the final abyss, a possibility more terrifying than sea monsters or nerve gas. The possibility that there was no ship. No crew died. It was all just a story. This is when the investigation shifted from the ocean to the dusty archives, from the telescope to the magnifying glass. Researchers, skeptics, began another hunt, not for a cause, but for an origin. And what they found, or rather what they didn't find, shook the entire myth. The first and most solid bulwark against any legitimate ship is the Lloyd's Register, the Bible of the shipping industry. The name of the Ourang Medan does not appear there. Not in 1947, not before, not since. They searched the records of Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Batavia, the major ports of the Netherlands. Still silence. The ship has no registration number, no recorded history, no official owner. It is a ghost in the archives. Even the name, Ourang Medan, is suspicious. It is not standard Dutch. In Malay and Indonesian, Ourang Medan means man from Medan, a port city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. It sounds more like a nickname, a folk name, than the official name of a Dutch merchant ship. It is as if the narrator chose a name with a mystical Far Eastern feel to add to the allure of his story. And what about the rescue ship, the Silver Star? The crew of the Silver Star had the only clue to the whole story. But when investigators tried to locate the ship, they ran into another maze. There were several ships named Silver Star during that period, but none of their logs recorded a terrifying encounter with the Ourang Medan in the Strait of Malacca. All leads led to dead ends. So where did this story come from? Tracing the newspaper accounts, one finds its origins in a series of articles published in February and March 1948 in De Locomotief, a Dutch-language newspaper in Indonesia. From there, it was picked up by the Associated Press and spread around the world. But all of these articles cited a single source, an anonymous witness from the Silver Star who was never identified. The story was based on another ghost story. In the 1950s, a German author named Otto Mielke wrote about this incident in the series of books Das Totenschiff auf hoher See, The Ship That Died at Sea. It was Mielke who added many sensational details, embellishing the story, turning it from a strange news item into an immortal maritime legend. It is very possible that we are not analyzing a historical event, but analyzing an excellent work of horror literature. If you look at it as a made-up story, everything suddenly becomes suspiciously perfect. It is the perfect horror formula. The desperate cry for help? Check. The ghost ship adrift? Check. The unexplained mystery, the bodies dying of fright? Check. And most importantly, the convenient destruction of all evidence? Check. The explosion closes all doors of investigation, allowing the imagination to run free forever. The story of the Ourang Medan doesn't need to be true because it's too good to be false. It has become a self-replicating virus in the collective consciousness, a modern parable about our fears of the sea and the unknown. And so, we can close the case. Ourang Medan is just an urban legend, a campfire tale told by sailors, a ghost born of ink and newspaper. A logical, neat, and somewhat disappointing conclusion. But history always has its buts. There's always a missing detail, a piece of the puzzle that refuses to let the story rest. In May 1959, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, the CIA, declassified a document. In it, there was a letter to the CIA director in which the writer reported information he had heard from a friend. The friend claimed to have served on a ship in the Strait of Malacca and knew of a sole survivor of the Ourang Medan tragedy. The survivor was a German sailor, reportedly found on a life raft by a missionary and locals in the Marshall Islands. He died shortly after telling his horrifying tale, a tale of mysterious deaths and a deadly cargo hidden in the ship's hold. This CIA memo proves nothing. It is merely a retelling of another story, a rumor recorded in an official document. But its existence stirs up the waters once again. Why would the CIA care about a maritime ghost story? Is it because it isn't a ghost story? The absence of registration records could also be explained in another way. In the chaotic post-war world, off-the-books operations were commonplace. A ship engaged in arms smuggling, transporting wanted scientists, or carrying out a secret intelligence mission would never be officially registered. The absence of evidence, in this case, could be evidence of a high-level cover-up. The mystery of the Ourang Medan, at last, has grown beyond itself. It is no longer a question of a ship, but of the nature of truth and story. Perhaps the ship was real, but the story was distorted. Perhaps the story was real, but the ship was only a code name. Or perhaps, most terrifyingly, The whole event is a tear in the tapestry of history, a blind spot where fact and fiction merge, leaving us with an eternal echo. The Ourang Medan, whether in flesh or in words, has done its job perfectly. It has become the ultimate coffin, burying not just a crew, but the truth itself. And all it leaves us, the curious on the shore, is a spine-chilling question, one that will never be fully answered. We have come to the end of the journey, to the end of the chart, where all paths fade into mist. We have followed the Ourang Medan through the storms of conspiracy, through the calm seas of scientific reason, and finally, into the void of history itself, where a story can and cannot be. Now, with all the theories lying before us like the wreckage of a shipwreck, perhaps the right question is not which theory is true, but what does each theory say about our own fears? Let's look at them again, not as solutions, but as mirrors. The first mirror, gleaming with the cold steel of war, is the theory of Unit 731 and the death cargo. This is the fear of humanity itself. The fear that, deep down, we have the capacity to create instruments of pure destruction, that our evil can be bottled and shipped across the oceans. Ourang Medan in this mirror is a reminder that the most terrifying monsters do not rise from the sea, but from laboratories, wearing white coats and carrying briefcases of classified documents. It is the fear of a legacy of evil that we try to bury, but that continues to float, a time bomb of history. The second mirror, the calm and indifferent mirror of nature, reflects the hypothesis of chemical accidents and infrasound. This is the fear of meaninglessness, the fear that the universe does not care about our existence, that a random combination of molecules, a random vibration of the Earth's crust, can wipe out an entire crew without any reason, purpose, or malice. In this mirror, their deaths are not heroic, not a warning, they simply happen. Ourang Medan becomes a symbol of the fragility of human life before the cold laws of physics, a whisper that our life is but a small spark, extinguished at any moment by an invisible wind. And the third mirror, the most cracked and distorted, is the hypothesis of a hoax or cover-up. This is the fear of modernity, the fear of the information vacuum, the fear that truth is not a solid rock, but a mist that can be shaped or blown away at will. If the Ourang Medan is not true, it proves that a sufficiently haunting story can become true. If it is true and has been covered up, it proves that power can erase truth from history. Either possibility leads to a disturbing conclusion. We live in a world where we cannot trust the very things we read, the very stories that have shaped our past. Amid these three horrors, the story of Ourang Medan finds its enduring power. But perhaps, to truly feel the pulse of the legend, we must return to its heart, the story of the lone survivor. Whether he is a forgotten real person or a figment of the imagination, he is our emotional bridge to the tragedy. Imagine, for a moment, his dying words, the fragmented words of a mind shattered by terror. It wasn't people. It wasn't the mist. It came from below, no, from within, from the metal, from the air. A cold fire. It didn't burn the flesh, it burned the mind. My brothers, it didn't scream. Do you understand? The most terrifying thing was the silence. They just opened their mouths, and terror flooded in, turning them to stone. Their eyes saw not death, but the end of everything. They pointed not to the sky, but through the sky, pointed to the emptiness behind it all. The package. God, the package. We were ordered not to open it. They said it was the sealed fury of the devil. But we didn't need to open it. It found its way out. That account, whether true or not, did what no other archive could. It gave fear a voice. It turned the nameless bodies into brothers, into comrades. Ultimately, the mystery of the Ourang Medan lies not in the answers. It lies in the questions themselves. The ghost ship has become a mythical space, a Rorschach test of the sea, where each of us sees our deepest fears. It is proof that, even in the 21st century, when we have mapped the ocean floor and sent robots into space, there are still blank areas on the map of human knowledge. These blank spaces are both disturbing and strangely fascinating. They remind us that we don't know everything, and perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps the Ourang Medan never really sank. Perhaps it is still out there, a ship of questions, forever drifting on the ocean of the collective unconscious. Its crew is no longer Dutch, Indonesian, or German. It is us, trying to find meaning in the silence, trying to look into the darkness, and hoping that nothing will look back. And its final SOS, echoing through 8 decades, may not have been a cry for help, but it is a warning.